Okay, so I'm going to walk you through those last 4 questions on the packet so we can make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first question was 4n squared plus 4n plus 36 equals 0. Okay, we have to make sure that a is 1, so we divide everything through by 4. And we get n squared plus n plus 9 equals 0. So we can't factor that, so we're going to bring the 9 onto the other side. And we get negative 9 there. So in order to complete the square, I have to add a 1. I'm going to add a 1. And that's really 1 squared. So my factors are n plus 1, the quantity squared, equals negative 8. So when we take the square root of both sides, plus or minus on each side, not forgetting, we have n plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 8. So soon, like I said, we're going to be working with these negative square roots, but right now we can write no real solution. So that was number 21, and here's number 22. This is a much uglier one. 7k squared minus 16k plus 100 equals 0. And the good strategy is to get that 100 on the other side. So we have 7k squared minus 16k equals negative 100. Okay? And then sadly we have to divide everything through by 7. We could have done that up here, but I wasn't paying attention, so we can still do it here. And we have k squared equals negative, oops, not equals. Let's try that again. K squared minus 16 over 7k equals negative 100 over 7. And again, pretty ugly. Move this up. But I can still complete the square by adding 16 over 14 squared plus 16 over 14 squared. So what I want to do before I start doing anything is I want to simplify this fraction. So I'm just going to rewrite it as k squared minus 16 over 7k plus 8 over 7 squared equals negative 100 over 7 plus 8 over 7 squared, and that's just going to make things easier as I move along. So my factors are k minus 8/7 squared equals, now I have to do the math here, so I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to do my math. Negative 100/7 plus 64 over 49. I have to get a common denominator of 49. So I have to multiply negative 100 times 7. So I have negative 700 plus 64. Now I already know that I'm probably not going to get a real number, but I want to keep going through because eventually we're going to do imaginary numbers. And I get negative 636. So negative 636 over 49. I bring that over here, negative 636 over 49. I then take the square root of both sides of the equation. And again, I'm going to get an irrational number and an imaginary number, but we can go a little bit further until we can really solve this problem. And so what do I know about this problem, or this radical? So we talked about this in class. I can break up the radical. So I have negative 636 over the square root of 49, so I can actually do that math, and that is the negative square root of 636 over 7. There's my 7. So now I have a 7 here, so eventually I'm going to be able to solve this problem. But right now we have this guy equals plus or minus the square root of negative 636 over 7. And we can say that there's no real solution. Aren't you excited about learning when we're going to be able to have this imaginary number system? It's going to be fabulous. Okay. Now we're going to move on to 23. Number 23 is 10p squared plus 4p plus 77 equals 9. I'm going to divide everything through. Well, let's do some combining of like terms first. So let's bring this negative 77 over. This positive 77 over. So we have this equals negative 68. I divide everything through by 10. So I get p squared plus 4/10. I'm automatically going to make that into 2/5 p. I'm going to leave my space so I can complete the square, and I'm going to turn this into 34 over 5, negative 34 over 5, because I can. I'm going to complete my square by adding 2 over 10 squared, adding 2 over 10 squared. And again, you're probably already realizing that we're not going to get a real solution, but I want you to keep going so you can practice this problem. So here I can simplify that by making that 1/5. So I'm just going to write p plus 1/5 squared equals, well, what is it going to equal? So now I have to do my math. So I have negative 34 over 5. I'm going to make this 1/5. So 1/5 squared is plus 1 over 25. So I'm going to get my common denominator of 25. And negative 34 times 5 is negative 170. So, that's a nice number. So we have negative 169 over 25, and look at that. So eventually you're going to see that we can actually take the negative square root of 169 and make it 13, but for now we have to kind of leave it. Okay, so here we go. There we go. And so we get p plus 1/5 equals positive negative the square root of negative 169, and I'm just going to go straight through that final step and make this a 5 here. Now how did I do that? I did that by breaking this up to positive negative the square root of negative 169 over the square root of 25, and I can make the square root of 25 5. And again, I'm not going to have a real solution, so no real solution. Tomorrow we're going to work on how to actually solve for this even though there's no real solution. And last is number 24. So let's hope we have a real solution for number 24, because I'm kind of bored with not having real solutions. So number 24 is going to be 3x squared equals negative 4 plus 8x. Let's see. So I'm going to bring, I can do this a couple of ways. I can either bring my 8x over, or I can first divide everything through by 3. I'm going to bring my 8x over, just because I can. Minus 8x equals negative 4. I'm going to divide everything through by 3, because I need to make a 1. So I get x squared minus 8/3 x. I'm going to leave that space. Negative 4/3, because I need to complete the square. I'm going to add half of 8/3, which is 8/6. I'll just leave it as 8/6 for now. squared If you want to go right to that step of simplifying that fraction, that's a great idea too. So I'm going to simplify this fraction when I write it in its factors. So 8/6 is the same as 4/3. And I'm going to do some math. So negative 4/3 plus 4/3 squared. Okay, so negative 4/3 plus 16 over 9. So I have to change this into ninths. So when I change this into ninths, I multiply this by 3, so I have to multiply that by 3, so I get negative 12, and what do you know, we finally have a real solution. So negative 12 plus 16 is positive 4, so here we go, 4/9. And that's my math to add these guys to get the 4/9. Now we do it. Square root property. Once we get the square root property, we have our x minus 4/3 equals plus or minus the square root of 4/9. And again, it's important to know your radical rules. Plus or minus the square root of 4/9 is the square root of 4 over the square root of 9, which equals 2/3. So I can write x minus 4/3 equals plus or minus 2/3. And this is where we have to set up our trusty t-chart. So I have x minus 4/3 equals the positive 2/3, and x minus 4/3 equals the negative 2/3. So if I add 4/3 to both sides of this equation, I get x equals 6/3, which is 2. And if I add 4/3 to this side of the equation, to both of this equation, I get x equals 2/3. So I finally have two real solutions. 2/3 and 2. So those are the answers to the 4 questions that we did for homework last night. I asked you to do 1 through 10 on the opposite page. And it looks like this. Okay. And I also said I want you to use the quadratic formula. So let's be reminded about what the quadratic formula is. The quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. So we have to write that down. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the very first thing you would have to do here is identify your a, your b, and your c. And now you can plug it into your quadratic formula. There might be some of these that you could solve by completing the square or factoring. If you find you can factor and you want to, go for it. You don't have to use the formula, but that's up to you. Bye.